Today on Locked On Canadiens, does the Tanev trade help or hurt the Habs on the trade market?
You are Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to episode 1021. And we thank you for making us your first listen of the day every day. We are free and available, as you know, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you get your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. My name is Laura Saab, also known as The Active Stick, and I'm joined for the last time this week by the wonderful Scott Matla of Habs Eyes on the Prize, because we will have a special guest tomorrow in his place. Scott, the Laval Rocket had a shutout, and they are smelling the playoffs all over again.
I mean, in a perfect world, yes. They, like I said, the weekend they had against Toronto was about as brutal as you can get for a team with the playoff hopes. Rochester lost to Syracuse tonight. They are still stuck on 56 points. The Rockets have moved up to 53 points. The Rocket have two out-of-division games left this week. They go to Hartford on Friday, and they go to Springfield on Saturday. Hartford sitting fourth in the Atlantic Division. Springfield sitting in sixth in the Atlantic Division. Winnable games for the Rocket, who have actually played very well against Hartford. And I believe this is their first showdown with Springfield this season. I may potentially be wrong on that. But these are games that they need to win, because going into next week, then it is Syracuse on Wednesday, Cleveland at home, and then they welcome Bridgeport for two more games, and then straight down the stretch outside of one game against Springfield. Everything is against divisional rivals: Toronto, Belleville, Toronto, Utica, Belleville, Syracuse, Cleveland, Belleville. That's about you have to thread the needle, basically be flawless for the rest of the year if you're the Laval Rocket. To kind of recap tonight's game, nothing happened for two periods, and I'm not really over-exaggerating that. Nothing really happened in the first period. Nothing really happened in the third period. The Rockets scored 4 goals in the second period, both of them about 30 seconds apart at the beginning and end of the period here. And Jakub Dobiš ends with his first professional shutout of his career, which is good. Team still looks a little bit wonky. This is a team that misses some of that stability on the back end. They miss having, I think, Arbor Jacki there, which, of course, who wouldn't at this point? And I think they're searching for an identity. The offense is looking to get fully in sync. It has brief moments, which is when they scored their goals tonight. But overall, this is a team that is still, I don't want to say bereft of an identity, but hasn't quite dialed in what its young core was or needs to be for the rest of the season. They haven't played poorly. They're just missing some of, I guess, the panache that they had during their winning streak. They're 23, 22, and 7 on the year, which means, they're well below 500 in that regard. But with that, just over 500 in the way the AHL points race work. 20 games left and 3 points out of a playoff spot. Crazier things have happened, but they're going to need smidgen of help here, and constantly losing to Rochester this season has not really helped their case in that regard.
So it's not out of the realm of possibility. We saw them do it a couple of years ago. I'm trying to remember which year, because there was one year where they came out of the gate flying and they were just a top team. I think 2 years in a row, right? So am I remembering right, under Joel Bouchard?
They were in the COVID year. They didn't lose a game for like a month and a half, basically had the North Division locked up and coasted through the rest of that. Under Bouchard, he left during the middle of, or at the end of the Rocket playoff run, and then Jean-Francois Houle came in. it's they've had good teams. They're a solid team. The biggest issue with this team, and it has always been this way for whatever reason, is they take so many penalties. They lead the AHL in penalty minutes by 21 minutes. The next closest team is Tucson, and then Belleville at 813 minutes. And they are far and away taking too many penalties, and they have one of the worst penalty kills in the league at 79%. They struggle mightily with that. And their power play this year is also just middle of the pack, so they can't get by on that. Part of it is they've been missing key pieces due to call-ups. Mitchell Stevens was called up. You had no Justin Barron this year. You had injuries. Brandon Gignac was called up. Joshua Waugh's been up and down. Gabriel Bork has missed most of this entire season. Riley Kidney hasn't taken the step forward. It's a growing pain season. There's a lot to like about this team. It's just when they are not clicking, it is a very frustrating experience. And the talent is there and you see it. It's just like the games against Toronto this past week where nothing is in sync. You see the effort. There's no finished product there. And that's the hallmark of a team that is young, that is looking for guidance here. Guys like Philippe Maillet and Elias Anderson are doing a very good job stepping up in there. But they need, Brandon Gignac just got back, so I'm not going to, group him in there. But more from Mitchell Stevens. They could use a little bit more out of William Trudeau. Toby Paquette-Bisson has stepped up as their most reliable option. Logan Mailloux is now pointless in 5 straight games. Growing pains are a part of this. Them missing the playoffs doesn't mean that this season was a failure in any sort of the way there. It helped a lot of players. Joshua Waugh wouldn't be where he's at right now without what he learned while he was in the AHL, even for a little bit, and taking that to the NHL level. I'd like to see if they can add some veteran forward help in there. They need some scoring help in there unless they get Joshua Waugh back permanently. We'll wait and see. David Reinbacher's clock we are ticking closer and closer and closer to that. When that happens, humongous boost. I wouldn't be shocked if he goes to the NHL either. They just go, we're going to see what he can do at that point. But he's coming in after the trade deadline. So they want him. He's not going to be able to play for the Rocket if they make the playoffs. Unless he is, over and in Laval before, I believe it's 3 p.m. on Friday, March 8th. He's not going to be a part of that playoff run. There's a lot to like, and next year's going to be just as good. You're going to have guys like Luke Tuck coming in, a Reinbacher, a Hudson. Are you going to have an Oliver Kapanen coming over from Europe, Cedric Guindon, maybe a Vincenz Roach? You're going to have options coming in. The deeper the prospect pool gets, the more reasons to watch this. There's going to be bumps in the road. That's just how young teams are. But I urge you to still watch. There's a lot of good talent on this team. And when they're on, there's nobody more exciting in the AHL. They put up points like you wouldn't believe. And then they fight everybody because apparently that's what they like to do this season overall.
I just have one question. I want to go back to the penalties that you were talking about. Is it because of a lack of discipline? Like, are they, like, what's going on? Like, is it because they're not playing a tight game? Is it because they just have bad little habits on the ice? What is it? I don't necessarily think in the AHL it would be just because they're playing too physically and getting caught.
It's a mix of things. They fight a lot. Riley McKay leads the AHL in fighting majors with 8 this season. They've never really turned down a chance to get after it. And some of it comes from a lack of discipline. We've seen Logan Mailloux likes to defend his teammates and his goaltender because I believe he and Jakub Dobish are like roommates on the road. They are extremely tight. And that when people, get too close or touch him, he is there to be the diffuser in that situation. And I like teammates sticking up for each other. But we've talked about this with Arbor Jackeye. Pick your spots. And then some of it is they take a lot of penalties because they are often chasing the play. When they get stuck in a cycle, they are struggling to break through that, end up taking a tripping penalty, a hooking penalty, a holding penalty, a delay a game penalty, a whatever you want to call it sort of thing. And all those minor penalties add up. A lot of these are from just games where it's 10-minute misconduct, 5-minute fighting major, this and that, where games get a little out of hand, looking at every Belleville Senators game ever. And again, hallmark of a growing team. lacking discipline is part of that. They will improve, and when they stay out of the box, they're a much better team. But when they are lacking that discipline, all bets are off on what you're going to see.
And honestly, we're going to take this back to the NHL level because the Canadiens have a game against the Florida Panthers, and we don't know what to make of it just yet. And we're going to talk about that in just one moment here on Locked On Canadiens. But first, this episode is brought to you by Gametime. How often have you been looking for tickets to an event in your town or even in another town? You're scrambling, you're trying to find the tickets. It might be the last minute. You might have missed the boat on the first go around, or, just there wasn't enough at the time. I can tell you that finding tickets for any event you want to go to should not be stressful because now we've got Gametime. There's so many things like last minute tickets, there's flash deals, there's zone deals, and it's so easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your arena. You can see the view from your seat so you know what you're getting into, and there's always the lowest price guarantee, even for event cancellation protection, right? Like, this is such a safe way to buy tickets. And also, honestly, they have tickets right up until the event starts or even within an hour of when it starts. You know exactly what to expect. You get exactly what you want. There's no guesswork. There's no nasty surprises. It's so easy and stress-free. So definitely, you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And now it's time to preview the Montreal Canadiens game. And honestly, I don't really know what to make of it. I don't know what to expect because I still haven't figured out this season what the Florida Panthers are.
They're annoyingly good, which I hate.
But that's the thing. It always feels like they're good when you expect them to be bad, and they're bad when you expect them to be good.
And I thought they started this season like they did last year. Remember, this was a team that was in the lottery when we had their first round pick last year. And then they just decided we're going to go all the way to the Stanley Cup final and screw you if you get in the way. The Panthers are a bit of a wagon. They're 8-2-10 in their last 10 games, which not great because they could be 0 for their last 10 and still probably be heavy favorites over the Montreal Canadiens. It's a game that worries me. They're just getting Matthew Tkachuk back. They got Kevin Stenlund back. They are, of course, just a dangerous hockey team. And every single time that the Habs play them, I know we say this and everything, it's always dumb. It's never simple. And I'm just looking at this team, and it's just a murderer's row at the top of their score sheet. Sam Reinhart's 1 goal away from 40 on the season. He has 68 points. Matthew Tkachuk, 67 points in 58 games. He's closing in on 50 assists. Carter Verhaeghe's got a 30-30 season in 59 games. Alexander Barkov, 55 points in 53. And then even when it drops off, Evan Rodriguez, 33 points in 59 games. Sam Bennett's got 29 and 47. And they've done this with, Aaron Ekblad missing time, a kind of patchwork defense a little bit there. And thankfully, Radko Gudas does not play for the Ducks anymore, as far as I am aware. At least I hope not. I hated that. And then, of course, Sergei Bobrovsky and Anthony Stolarz have been like lights out for the team this year. And I will never, ever understand that. I don't know when Bob's supposed to be good or bad. You look at the bottom half of their lineup and you go, nothing's really impressive, but they just keep winning games. And Nick Cousins is a deplorable pile of trash that I hope gets pile driven into the end boards. But
tell us how you really feel.
He's a weasel. He's a rat. And I know that he's a Canadian, and I know that he name searches as when he was on the Habs, because every time he was on the power play and he didn't do anything, people would tweet about it, and then he would like the tweets after the game because he's a passive aggressive little weasel. And I look at the last game against the Sabres where he gets swiped at, goes down like he got shot, crowd forms, and then he is miraculously okay. It would make even the most expert, I can't say the word I want, Craphauser in soccer/football proud of what he can do. And he's going to drive the Habs nuts. And I know he's going to drive Josh Anderson nuts. He's going to drive Jack Eye nuts. He's going to drive Struble nuts. He's going to drive Gallagher nuts. He's going to drive whoever's in net nuts. And none of that's going to matter because it's going to be 5-0 Panthers at that point in the game when he starts going. Back to my original point is the Panthers are good and they're annoying. They're like a skilled 2011 Bruins team. And that drives me nuts because that Bruins team sucked and I hated it because it got away with everything. And the Panthers are doing just the same thing again. And they're at the top of the Atlantic Conference, 82 points, better than the Bruins, top team in the Eastern Conference. It doesn't bode well for a Habs team that couldn't get in gear against the Coyotes the other night.
Maybe they'll wake up against the Panthers. Like maybe it'll motivate them. Or maybe, like you never know which goaltender shows up, right? Like which version of Bobrovsky's shows up, or even Stoller's, right? So I don't know. I'm trying to be optimistic here. For me, like my whole thing with tomorrow's game with the Montreal Canadiens is do not unravel. Do not fall apart at the first sign of adversity because chances are the calls are not going to go your way. We're talking about this being like the 2011 Bruins. Well, the calls are not going to go your way, Habs. The Panthers are going to get away with everything. Also, just literally, please do not take penalties against any teams anymore because you cannot keep the puck out of the net. Also, with the power play, it's just like for me, like if the Canadiens can at least stick to some semblance of good play, I'm going to be happy about it because I don't necessarily need the win. Even if it's against the Panthers and the Panthers annoy us, I don't need the win. I don't need the W, but I need them not to fall apart. I need them not to unravel and then just start behaving like they start playing hockey so immaturely. And I know that doesn't sound right, but that's exactly what they do. Like it just feels like they let the game take it over. Like they let the opponents take over the game. They lose control of everything, and then they're scrambling and they're behind the play by 2 steps all night for the rest of the time. So just like if they can just stick to one plan and execute, I don't care. I don't care about the win. I don't care if the other team is so much better than them. I just don't want to see them fall apart, unravel, and then fall back into bad habits.
And I think that's it, is that we know Florida can score at will, and they've done it against the Habs. Remember that period where there were like 13 goals scored and it was terrible? It was both ridiculous and terrible. We know they're capable of doing that. And this is the kind of game that if you're going to lose, there's good ways to lose. That if you keep it competitive, that you are scoring goals, but you're still going to lose out to this, fine. I don't want it to be one of those games where the Habs come out, get like 8 shots midway through the second period, get one weird fluky goal, and that's it. It's a pride thing, is that I don't think they're going to beat the Florida Panthers tomorrow. I'm not going to lie to our listeners like that because I don't. I think Florida's a much better team than the Habs are, but I would be lying if I didn't say that I think the Habs have something to prove in this game. You played well last week and you lost all 3 of those games. You played like crap and you won. Can you marry the middle ground there a little bit there? I'd like to see, because then they have Tampa and they have other stuff. Like their schedule doesn't get any easier, and it's really annoying because they are in the South where they usually don't play well. You have Tampa on Saturday with something to prove. You have the Predators on Tuesday, and then you have Carolina after that. There's a lot of teams there that you've had back and forths with. You've had feisty games with, especially the Hurricanes, who took a run at Slavkovsky earlier this year. That run up to the trade deadline is going to be really telling. We're going to see who actually cares and who doesn't. I'm hoping in this game they give a crap without kind of losing that composure. You can be confident, but don't, like you said, don't go chasing plays, chasing after nonsense. You're a worse team when you do that. If they want to run around, you send your message and then you keep playing hockey. If you keep chasing them, you're doing exactly what they want because they have the talent that they can score. Well, you're too busy chasing them around, and the Habs do not have that luxury at all.
Right, exactly. Speaking of luxuries, we are a week away from the trade deadline. Things are heating up, and we want to talk about how the Tanev trade could potentially help or hurt the Montreal Canadiens, and that's coming up in just one moment here on Locked On Canadiens. But first, this episode is brought to you by Sleeper. We are already in the home stretch of the season, and the Canadiens kind of did exactly what we expected them to do. And regardless of where we are, I want to remind everyone that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. Honestly, the app is so easy to use and you can connect with other fans. There's like a chat and it's so easy, so simple. And your entries can be made in under a minute. And it doesn't have to just be daily fantasy NHL. You can play daily fantasy NFL, NBA, MLB, or college football when it's in season, all on Sleeper. And all you have to do is pick whether certain players will record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. And to win 100 times your cash on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Habs fans. You can win 100 times your money by playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. All right, Scott, I had this whole spiel about defense and the defensive prospect identities and stuff like that, and I had to scrap it because there was a trade in the NHL that may or may not affect the trade market for Kent Hughes. And so that's what you wanted to talk about, so that's what we're doing.
Well, and so here's the thing is, one, not that I would ever overrule my co-host for having good ideas. I just thought it was timely because the Chris Tanev trade happened in the midst of the Laval Rocket game tonight. You know, the real hockey thing, not like the NHL was on or anything like that or any other sporting things. And my first thought was the minute I saw that Chris Tanev was being traded from Calgary to Dallas for a second-round pick, a conditional third, a fourth to New Jersey for making the transaction happen cap-wise, and not a defensive prospect that I'm super high on, but I'm also not a prospect expert. I thought my biggest thought was David Savard's stock price is likely rising. But the biggest problem with that is the return for Chris Tanev, arguably the top defenseman on the trade market going into this deadline, got nothing. And part of that can be, is it just an underwhelming return for a GM who's maybe not good? I look at the return for the Elias Lindholm trade where maybe it's not ideal. Maybe Craig Conroy is just not really good at this, and that could be it. But early signs are pointing that David Savard, I know people are going to say, we want a first or we want a young top prospect. I don't know if that's going to be happening this year, but that doesn't mean that a market won't emerge there now. With Chris Tanev off the board now, Monahan's gone, Lindholm's been traded, Tanev's off the board. A guy like David Savard or Jonathan Kovacevic or Jordan Harris, that trade value, they're not value, but interest is likely to go up. We saw after Lindholm got traded, the Monahan trade was like 3 days later. With Tanev now traded, would I be shocked by the end of this weekend if we're hearing, the next defensive person, maybe it's David Savard, maybe it's not, who the hell knows, is in there? This only helps Kent Hughes' bargaining position going into this deadline, that if a team really wants that shot blocking veteran defenseman, okay, we've got one of the few left for that. Pay me for it. It's also, can you find a GM stupid enough to take on a 2-year contract at this point? I think this is a good thing for the Habs. I still don't expect this trade to happen in season, though. I think going into next year, though, David Savard, before the season even starts, is going to be at the top of every trade bait list at that point.
And that's the thing with David Savard, is that we've always found that he was not used correctly on this team. He was not signed for the right position. I think if they'd signed him for the right position, it wouldn't be such a big deal. The right contract, because he's a guy that does have value. It's just that this was not what the Habs needed, right? And the Canadians seem to like him. We talked about this yesterday. He seems to like playing in Montreal. His teammates seem to like him. But at this point, like if he's going to fetch value, like that's what I would prefer the Canadians do. And the fact that like the closer we get to the trade deadline, the more the GMs are prone to some kind of like this FOMO sort of bidding war kind of thing, I feel like the Habs could be at an advantage at that point. Like for me, I'm just trying to figure out which team would want him. And I laugh a lot with the idea that like a team that he was already on might want him, like Tampa.
Yeah, and like I'm looking through some of these like trade lists here, is that a lot of them, Jake Gensel's at the top of things here, which I think Pittsburgh is dumb for trading him. But Noah Hannafin, left defenseman, but Chris Tanev was the top right defenseman in there. The next one is the fourth period listing Colton Parayko, but I haven't heard anything about that. And Sean Walker, okay, Ilya Labushkin, maybe, but a guy like David Savard carries that veteran name there. The sticking point in all of this to me is that the Canadians apparently don't want to move him because they like him. Fourth period saying Toronto, Tampa, Dallas can probably remove them. Edmonton and Colorado were the teams that they've heard linked to David Savard. At that point, you're not getting a ton, and you're still not going to get a ton in return there. I can't wait to see how the chips fall here, because if Calgary is going full fire sale now, which is weird because they're on a winning streak at this current moment, I'm surprised that this is the time they picked for, because I think they're sitting at 63 points. They're not really in a playoff spot. They're within, I'd say within striking distance. They're 5 points out with a game in hand on Nashville, and LA having a game in hand on them in the Pacific there. It's possible, but I think if they're pulling the plug, you're going to see a lot of things spiral very quickly here. You're going to see Noah Hannafin go. You're going to see Jacob Markstrom go. And again, when these things happen, that's a boost for the Canadians. Jacob Markstrom's off the board. We need a goalie. What about Jake Allen? Oh, one of the other defensemen is gone. Do we need Jordan Harris? Do we need Jonathan Kovacevic? Do we want David Savard? Is there someone else that we want to bring in that? The minute teams start getting desperate here, if pieces start moving really early going into this weekend, we saw with the Toffoli trade when the Habs did that, the Habs are in a better bargaining position because they have assets that people maybe don't want at full price. But if you missed the sale and you rush in to get whatever's left, it's like when there's a winter storm coming. Oh no, I missed out on getting this and this. You just start grabbing whatever you can that's left. Sometimes it works out okay. And sometimes you end up with like black bean paste and like wheat germ, and that's about it. And you're hoping for the best in that. Yeah, that I don't even know if those two things are well.
Black bean paste is real, and you can do a lot of good things with it, but do not put wheat germ with it.
That means you white people. Says me. Anyways.
Speaking of white people, Andrew Berkshire will be on the show tomorrow. I'm going to tell him I said this too.
Well, you're leaving it in the episode, so
yeah. All right. So if you would like to send us mailbag questions, remembering that Andrew will be here to join me, please send them to lockedoncanadian@gmail.com, lockedoncanadians@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter at LO_the_active_stick. We will accept mailbag questions via DM or just tag. You can also leave them in the YouTube comments. You can put MBQ or mailbag question at the beginning of your question. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you, or I will talk to you tomorrow. Scott will be here next week.